Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, the kind of launch of our report, Rebalancing the Relationship, focusing on successful collaboration. My name's Alex. I'm Head of Networks and Influencing at NCVO, and I'll be chairing today's session. And I'm joined by a number of panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. Just before we get started, just to remind everyone on today's webinar that this session is being recorded. And will be made available both to kind of attendees who have signed up, but also will be on our Know How Nonprofit website after today as well. Final thing that I will just mention on housekeeping, you'll have the chat function is live for today's session, and this is particularly useful for giving us either any notice that there's some technical issues that we need to be aware of, but also to ask us any questions as part of the questions and answers session at the end. And it's really useful if you think of a question, do ask the question as we go through. Sometimes we get to the end of that session and suddenly we're inundated with questions in that final few minutes. Do kind of share your questions in advance as we go through today's session. So as I said, I'm joined by Rebecca Young. Rebecca is our policy and influencing lead at NCVO and is one of the co-authors of the Rebalancing the Relationship report. And we're also joined by Sandy Hall-Riven, the Chief Executive of the Creative Youth Network, who will also be responding to the report and kind of available for questions and answers at the end. We're going to, at this point, just tell you a little bit about the session. So before I hand over, in today's session, we will be kind of covering the findings from the Rebalancing the Relationship project. And as part of that, we'll be talking about some of the 5 features that kind of make up collaborative organizations. We'll be exploring some of the key learning that's emerged from the project. And then we'll have kind of Sandy will talk a little bit more about his reflections on particularly around some of the issues and the challenges of leading collaborative organizations. And as I said, that will take us about 40 to 45 minutes, and then there'll be some time for questions and answers and discussion at the end of today's session. Before I hand over to Rebecca, we are just going to ask you a quick question. So we want to understand a little bit more about who's joining us in today's session. So we're going to ask you a quick poll. So why do you think it is important to collaborate? And there are a number of options. You can only choose one for today, but it just gives us a sense of what are some of the kind of perspectives of people in the room or kind of in our virtual room, so that we can kind of perhaps tailor both some of the things that we might say and frame, and also think about potential questions that might come up. So in terms of collaboration, is it that it's about maximizing impact for people and communities, those who are using services that we are offering, many of us are offering as charities and voluntary organizations? Is it about choice? Or is it about supporting other charities in pursuit of their mission, perhaps? For some, it might be about working in consortia, kind of doing partnership projects, particularly to bring in funding or to be able to apply for bigger bits of funding kind of with partners. Or is it to be able to reach more people, whether that is to be able to support more people who might need our services, or to reach particular kind of groups and demographics that we ourselves might be struggling to reach, and we might want to work in partnership with others. So I think that's the end of our poll. Brilliant. So we can see on the screen kind of 88% of people on today's session have put that this is absolutely about maximizing impact for people and communities. So whilst collaboration might be a really positive thing, the priority is that kind of collaboration makes a difference, that it achieves something tangible, some tangible change for people and communities as a result of the way in which we might choose to work and deliver our work. So that's really useful to see. And obviously a couple of other things kind of mentioned, particularly that reaching marginalized groups, kind of way down the list in terms of the percentages. But of course, many of these things are all interconnected. We can't achieve maximum impact unless we are also thinking about all of those other aspects as well. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca. Rebecca, who, as I said, is one of the co-authors of today's report, to tell us a little bit more about the findings and some of the key lessons and learning from the project. Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alex. So Rebalancing the Relationship is a partnership project between NCVO, NCVO and Lloyds Bank Foundation, funded by Lloyds Bank Foundation. It started in early 2019 and is aimed to understand the experiences of competition and collaboration between charities operating in public service delivery. It has particularly looked at how we can foster better collaboration between charities of different sizes. This is because we've heard from members that they've had difficult experiences of charities larger than them, and the smaller the organisation, the harder it was for them to bounce back. Having completed research and engagement activities, from a call for evidence to in-depth interviews, we have recently launched the final report. While these activities happened before COVID, we recognise that there's been a huge increase in collaborative spirit across the sector since the start of the pandemic. This work has focused on public service delivery charities, but we think there's useful learning here for any organisation. There are some key assumptions that have underpinned this work. So variety is a strength in the sector rather than a weakness. Partnership is not always the best approach. It needs to be right for communities and impact. Quality is just as important as quantity, and collaboration is a broad spectrum, from formal partnership to informal arrangements. No organisation is perfect. We don't think that big is bad or small is good, or vice versa. Each organisation has strengths, and all organisations make mistakes. In public service delivery, all charities experience barriers to delivering high quality support. But we know that the odds are really stacked against smaller organisations, specialist charities, and those led by marginalised groups, such as user-led organisations, disabled person-led organisations, and BAME-led organisations. Finally, throughout this work, we talk about larger and smaller charities, rather than large and small. This is because it's the imbalance of size and power that can really cause tension in collaboration. This project has found that charities have both positive and negative experiences of competition and collaboration, but negative experiences have undermined trust between charities. Many are distrustful and suspicious of other organisations as a result. We know these experiences also have a ripple effect. So, for example, poor treatment in a service delivery context might undermine collaboration in a policy and campaigning forum. The way authorities commission and procure charities to deliver services can make collaboration harder, but not impossible. And there are lots of examples of charities and leaders forging a new path to collaborate even in a competitive system. Based on good practice in the sector, we have identified 5 key features of collaborative organisations. These are competing in an ethical way, being open to collaboration, collaborating in a variety of ways, developing quality partnerships, and fostering a collaborative internal culture and demonstrating collaborative leadership behaviours. Collaborative organisations compete in an ethical way. This means they bid in a way that is mindful and respectful of other organisations. The report details practices to avoid and offers positive alternatives based on good practice that already exists in the sector. But just to pick out a few examples, charities tell us that lead partners often put them in bids without their knowledge or don't intend to give them any work or funding subsequently. This is called bid candy, and it is vital that charities develop fair and genuine partnerships. We also know that some charities put in bids when they know they don't have the right knowledge, expertise, or local presence to deliver well. Often they then rely on small local charities to pick up the pieces for free. There is particular tension around mainstream organisations winning the work that has been the bread and butter of user-led organisations, but subsequently not being able to deliver well. Really collaborative organisations have a critical understanding of their own strengths and weaknesses and really understand where they are best placed to deliver. We also know that charities struggle if others take their ideas and use them to win work without giving them credit or reward, or if organisations win work and undermine the good work of predecessors. Collaborative organisations are also open to collaboration, and in particular, they're keen to collaborate with organisations of different types and sizes, from national to local, larger and smaller, and organisations led by marginalised communities. Many have established partners, but really collaborative organisations are open to exploring new partnerships and connections. There are a few factors that help with this. For example, using different methods to identify partners, not just using market engagement events or recommendations from commissioners. These methods include online research, visiting other organisations, developing personal relationships, and using recommendations from local staff. It's also critical to make use of local CVS organisations. Communication is also really important, so communicating what you do and your intention to collaborate, communicating how you like to work with others, and it is especially helpful if you have existing partners that can share their positive experience, as this helps to build trust. We also know that co-producing services with communities is the right thing to do, but it also helps charities focus on shared purpose with other organisations. Collaborative charities often explore a range of ways to collaborate, and during this project, charities have told us about how they collaborate in bidding for and delivery of contracts, including fair and inclusive bidding practices, building the capacity of partners, influencing commissioners, taking on risk when others can't, working well in partnership, and exploring different mechanisms, such as consortia and alliances. There are particularly strong examples of larger organisations supporting smaller partners to meet funder requirements, develop policies, as well as develop bidding, monitoring and reporting skills, and enabling smaller local organisations to lead local work. There are also great examples of organisations pushing back on commissioners if they are creating barriers for smaller organisations or not commissioning well. Beyond the world of public service contracts, we've heard about charities sharing infrastructure and back office functions such as HR and IT, buying in the services of smaller organisations to deliver training, for example, setting up funds and grant schemes, sharing office space, setting up a consortia to buy goods and services collectively, reducing cost, and sharing knowledge. During the pandemic, there have been great examples of larger charities giving grants to smaller local organisations, organisations sharing staff and volunteers, and joining forces on campaigning. Collaborative organisations also develop fair and equal partnerships. Charities have told us that there are some key factors to support successful partnership working. So sharing power, ensuring partners are involved in decision making, information being shared, and building reciprocal relationships where all partners are valued as equals. Aligning what matters, so really thinking about values, culture and ways of working, but also embracing the difference that organisations can bring. Managing partnerships well, so ensuring there's fair and transparent payment, due diligence, agreements and policies, and regular, early and honest communication to present and resolve conflict. Having a contract in place is really important, but it's also useful to have a meaningful and useful agreement that really sets out how you work together. Flexibility is vital and works both ways. So it might be that smaller partners lack capacity and resource, but larger organisations might also be dealing with more process. Investing time and resource into building relationships and trust, and crucially developing partnerships before money becomes available. Partnerships are all about people, so it's important to make sure that those working in partnership can communicate clearly with empathy and humility, can build trust, and fundamentally like working with others. Power has come up in this project time and again, so building aware of this is really important to support good collaboration at an individual and organisational level. Organisations can have power in different ways. So for example, size and money, brand, connections and influence, and benefit from the privilege that staff and leaders hold. But there are some key things to remember. So you or your organisation might have power and not yet be aware of it. And even a perceived power imbalance in a relationship can have a real impact on trust in that relationship. Finally, power is relative and can change depending on the context. You might have more power than one organisation, but less than another. So collaborative organisations often have an internal culture that supports collaboration, and leaders have a vital role to play. We think there are 5 internal factors that can support your charity to work well with others. So culture, supporting staff to serve the community first rather than organisational interest or the funder. Embedding a learning culture so that staff are encouraged to talk about what is and isn't working. And incorporating responsibility for other organisations into your values and behaviours for the benefit of communities. Attitude to growth. So recognising that growth and sustainability are not always the same thing, and focusing on impact across organisations over market share or the growth of your single organisation. Strategy and decision making. So embedding collaboration as the default approach. And when deciding what to bid for, not bidding if you don't have local presence or a local partner, and also not bidding if the current organisation is delivering well. Capacity and structure, so really thinking about having the right skills, roles and team structures in place. And finally, leadership. And by leadership, we mean kind of CEOs, trustees and senior managers. Leaders can devolve responsibility to staff, making sure that they have all the right permissions to develop partnerships and relationships. Demonstrating collaborative behaviours, ensuring focus on key priorities and strengths, and sending a really clear message that partnership is vital and not a nice to have. Crucially, leaders set the right conditions, so really focusing on impact over financial targets and making sure the organisation has a healthy attitude to risk. We've developed a number of questions to help you reflect on the way you work with other organisations, and these sit across 6 key areas. These are detailed in the report, but examples include: what advantages does my organisation have compared to others, and how can we level the playing field? What are the challenges other types of organisations face? How do other organisations experience working with our organisation? How are the people we serve supported by other organisations? And how can we help others feel comfortable to have honest conversations with us? We're now going to do a quick poll to learn a little bit more about your experiences of collaboration. So this is really focusing on what features you think your organisation does well. And just as a quick reminder, those features are ethical competition, culture and leadership, openness, variety, and quality partnerships. We appreciate there might be kind of more than one of those that you think your organisation does well, but I think the option is to choose one. I think I can't see the poll results.
Rebecca, I can see the poll results. So just perhaps while we're just Rebecca is just trying to find them. So the results kind of look like this. So 30% of respondents, of people in the room here, saying kind of culture and leadership is kind of the most frequently mentioned feature in terms of things that people are saying their organisation kind of does well, which is clearly great to hear. 30%. Kind of the next couple underneath that were around quality partnerships. So 26% of people kind of saying, well, actually already people are good. My organisation is good at doing these kind of quality partnerships, the kinds of collaborations that probably we're talking about in the report. And then underneath that is an openness, probably also a clear value that might cut across a number of these areas. Some of the things that people have said, probably there is a bit of a gap between. So the kind of least kind of popular response here was around ethical competition. Only 7% people said that that was the kind of the top thing that their organisation was doing well, and that was kind of marginally kind of variety was here on 13%. So clearly culture and leadership, quality partnerships, the strongest things emerging here from the poll, and then kind of the weaker areas were around ethical competition and variety. Rebecca, I think, can I hand back to you?
Yes, thanks so much, Alex. So the next focus is what feature you think your organisation finds challenging. So again, these are ethical competition, culture and leadership, openness, variety and quality partnerships.
Great, so I will just share the results back kind of again. And interestingly here, we're not seeing a direct kind of opposite scoring here compared to the things that people have just said, kind of the organizations are doing well. So kind of quality partnerships is the most popular response here to the feature that people are saying that their organization finds challenging. And of course, that might be because the partnerships are difficult or challenging with others, not necessarily what their organization, your organizations are doing well. Then quite similar results. So not an awful lot between kind of the variety and ethical competition, really with cultural leadership and openness, all getting somewhere between 14 to 90% of respondents. So it seems to be the hardest thing that many people in the room are grappling with are these quality partnerships. Rebecca, back to you.
Thanks, Alex. And I think that really reflects the findings of the report as well. I think even when organisations are really trying their best in quality partnerships, there are still real kind of challenges and they really do have to work at it. So now we're moving on to the portion of the session which is reflection and discussion. And also hearing from Sandy, who's going to speak to us a little bit about leading a collaborative organisation.
Great, is that over to me then, Alex, is that right? Yeah, I'll do my bit. So good, well, hello everybody. So my name's Sandy, I'm the Chief Exec of the Creative Youth Network. I'm really pleased to be part of this research because I'm a great believer in partnerships. And I guess I've been asked to speak because we're part of a number of large partnerships that Touchwood have been quite successful. And so we currently work in direct partnership. And what I mean by that is partnership with a significant financial value both ways with over 14 other organisations. And we work alongside, of course, many, many more. And those partnerships include relationships with organisations that are much larger than our own and very, very tiny community-based village youth clubs and community groups. But between us, we work with over about 20,000 young people each year. So over the next sort of 10 minutes or so, I'll try to distill our experience and what I think I've learned kind of in the real world that actually reflects almost exactly what Rebecca has found in her report. But I'll take a sort of step back and start the story sort of way back. And just to give you a little bit of background about who we are as a charity, we're a youth work charity. We support young people to reach their potential. And we have a particular focus on working with those who are most disadvantaged. So we do everything from long-term one-to-one support and mentoring for those with very difficult backgrounds through to open access youth clubs across Bristol and the surrounding areas, what we call the West of England. We also have a thriving creative programme that puts on shows and mentors young artists. And as an organisation on our own, we work with about 10,000 young people each year. We have 150 staff and we turn over now about 4.5 million. And the reason I say that is because when we started, we were a very much smaller organisation. We got into partnerships when we really weren't that sort of size. And in fact, when I started this job 15 years ago, we had 4 staff, turned over about 200,000 and really didn't do very much work with young people at all. We were sort of effectively a dormant charity. So let's start back in 2008 when austerity started to hit, and it became clear that youth services were going to be cut as part of the austerity drive. So I brought together 2 partnerships, one in South Gloucestershire, which is a predominantly rural area around Bristol, and one in Bristol itself. And as a partnership of youth organisations, we wanted to preempt the problem of cuts and not just accept it. So the first thing we did was to set about talking to the local authorities about how we might produce a vision for youth services in the 2 areas. Significantly, one that would accept some cuts, because we recognised that the local authorities were in difficult circumstances, but not to cut them completely, which was absolutely on the cards in both of those areas, and to ask the local authorities to carry on investing in the work and work with the voluntary sector to keep delivering support for young people. And I'm pleased to say that as a partnership, we presented to both local authorities and we achieved that principle. And so both local authorities then set about commissioning their services as a way of saving money, but protecting that support for young people. But of course, that's when the partnership changes. You go from being a sort of a visionary partnership about the future, but then it gets to the point where, of course, everybody starts to have their eye on the money. And I guess it's sort of really important to, in those circumstances, to first of all acknowledge that that is the case. It is really important. We all had to survive as organisations, but to keep reminding ourselves that we were here for young people first and foremost. We'd worked closely with many of the organisations before, and as I said before, at the time we weren't much bigger than some of them. So we started the process. We spent many hours around flip charts, visioning what the services might look like in each area. And I think what was really important is that blue sky thinking is what got everybody excited and working together. We shared that vision. But we as Creative Youth Network sort of offered what you might call the secretariat. So we wrote up notes, we paid for facilitators, organised the meetings. We had to make sure that smaller organisations could attend. So part-time staff wanted evening meetings. They had lots of questions about how commissioning might work. And we had to support them in some cases around governance and other funding that they were receiving. So this was sort of almost more than a year out from the commissioning itself. But there was a time when we needed to start talking money and who was going to do what as we bid for this work. And there was some clear overlap in some groups. You know, we had 2 or 3 groups working with LGBT young people, some who covered similar geographical areas in both of the local authority areas. We had a couple of places where there were 2 or even 3 youth clubs very close to each other, run by different organisations, and some areas where there were none. There was a bit of a sort of youth desert, if you like. And so this was sometimes a kind of difficult process, because you actually have to, before you put the bid into, from my point of view, really try and work out what the delivery looks like. So I had to spend time with each organisation, checking their expectations and thoughts on what they should get. Most were reasonable and understood that there needed to be some real give and take. However, there was a point at which one larger organisation really didn't accept that and said that they clearly wanted to control at least 80% of the money, if not more, to lead the partnership. As a group, we discussed this and we were clear that that wasn't accessible. But Muggins here was the one who ended up having to do the behind the scenes work, sort of get people's views and opinions, and eventually get agreement that they should not be part of that partnership, even though we knew that by them not being part of the partnership, they would bid against us. So that was a really tough decision and a risky decision that we had to take, but it was one that was formed around the principles that we put together as a partnership. But the good thing was that before the bids went in, we were all clear about the level of funding that each organisation would get, and that for me is really important. It was, there was a little bit of give and take, maybe 10% either way, but it was a genuine partnership, one where everybody was going to grow potentially as an organisation, and not the bid candy that Rebecca talked about earlier. The other interesting thing that happened in both of the areas was that the original structure that everyone wanted was a sort of flat and collaborative and equal one, where everybody had an equal voice and managed the money equally. But it was interesting that as the process went through, it became clear that there was some risk of 2P, so the transfer of staff, and there was some contract risk too. We had to take a certain amount of risk on the money, and so it became clear that the smaller organisations, and actually some of the larger organisations too, were happy to step back and become subcontractors to our lead as an organisation. So we took the risk of 2P, and we took the risk of managing the contract, but also as an organisation we therefore reaped some of that reward by being able to manage the whole partnership. And today, those two partnerships total nearly £3 million annually, and we manage probably just over half of that money, but the rest is distributed across all of the other organisations. I'm pleased to say that we beat off the national competition, and I would say this, I hope, but we do offer a really good service to young people. But of course, it doesn't stop there. When you get the bid or you formalise that partnership, there's an ongoing work to keep the partnership going. The partnership includes one organisation, for example, based in deep in the Somali community in Bristol, that had yet to even become a constituted body by the time we bid for the work. So we had to hold the money until they did. But there was such a good group of local community members, so dedicated to their young people, that we really couldn't ignore it, and we knew that we would reach groups that others couldn't. And it's really genuinely taken about 3 years to get them up to speed on things like good governance, financial management, good evaluation. But I'm really pleased to say that they're now thriving as an organisation. Another situation we faced, one organisation nearly collapsed. They'd taken over a community building that wasn't paying its way, and we had to support them with agreement from our commissioners to stay afloat while they changed their business model. I'd say too that we've made plenty of mistakes. Sometimes we've made decisions without consulting the rest of the partnership, or assumed that partners would agree with our approach to a particular problem. In other words, it's a journey. Partnerships require constant maintenance and constant change. But as a result of it, we have, as an organisation, and as a result of these partnerships, now become quite a large organisation, and this in itself changes the dynamic. We have real power, and that's something that we have to get used to. And new organisations have popped up in both of those areas. One who described us as the ASDA of youth services, and so I've had to spend some time helping them to understand our work, but also acknowledging sometimes where our systems that are probably more clunky and a bit more cumbersome have sometimes got in the way of supporting young people in particular neighbourhoods. So it really is a constant journey. It's not something that you can ever stop doing. But fundamentally, we have achieved as a partnership what we aim to. Bristol and South Gloucestershire still have a functioning and thriving youth service that includes local authority funding. Between all the partners, we double the money coming into the area through other fundraising, and most importantly, we are supporting young people together and using the expertise of each partner and really good referral systems to ensure that young people get the support that they need. So just to sort of distill what comes out of that, so if we could put up the next slide. We've got it, brilliant, fantastic. So just to sort of really pull out what I think we've learned, and the first thing is to have a clear vision. It really allows you to get back to basics when things are difficult. So those conversations we had, for example, about combine 2 youth clubs in a particular area, both of course organisations wanted to keep them going. But actually going back, well, what would a young person want in that area? And then it becomes clear what it is that you really need to do. And it's a way of getting over some of those difficult conversations. The second thing is honesty. Whether you're part of a partnership or leading it, being honest, asking for what you want, saying what you think is right and wrong is really, really important, because if some of that stuff is unspoken, then you can't move forward. It will keep popping up in odd ways and sort of sabotaging the process. And, you know, it can be honesty about money or the quality of what you think another partner is a service that they're offering, how you feel the partnership is working. So it's really, really important. But that also must be combined with well, I think the lottery coined this phrase, which is really good, which is generous leadership. So if you're leading the partnership, then be generous with your time and your expertise. For me, the best partnerships are the one where everybody gets something out of it and grows within it. And if you're not leading, if you're part of a more junior member of the partnership, then understand that you might need to give up a little, to compromise, to really make the partnership work, but also understand what it is that you're good at and what you've really got to offer. And then the fourth thing is, it just takes effort. As I said at the end of the last bit, you know, we need to talk with our partners all the time, keep checking in. Things will change. We need to explore issues again, you know, change our systems to make it work. Even if you think it's been sorted 1,000 times before, you sometimes need to go back to the drawing board and look at it again. And all of those things, everything I've said, fundamentally is about building trust. If you have trust in the partnership will fly. If you have trust between the people and the organisation. So yes, we have contracts that sort of stipulate what each partner is going to do and how much money they're going to spend, but I think I've only ever referred to our contracts about once in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It really should be a backstop, because if you have that trust, that relationship with those that you're working with, and you take the time, it allows you to respond to crises like coronavirus, like knife crime or other issues. It allows you to bring in and bid for more money together, deal with the difficulties, and fundamentally only makes the partnership stronger. And if you have all of those things, then I'm really pleased that I think we've achieved that we're here for the good of young people, and that partnership absolutely allows us to do our job for young people better. So I hope that's helpful, but very happy to answer any questions about the sort of real world of partnerships, and I'm sure there's plenty of expertise out there too.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sandy and Rebecca. We've got loads of questions actually, which is fantastic. And kind of, I think many of the questions really wanting to kind of hear both a bit more kind of insight into the research and what kind of some of the findings are. But I think a lot of interest, particularly in some of the kind of the practicalities of doing this, and kind of advice, both the practical advice perhaps from Sandy, but also from Rebecca on what we've heard and some of the examples of good collaboration around. Just to say to all those kind of listening in, please do still keep using the chat box to ask more questions. It's great to see them come through, and we've got a good amount of time to kind of have some discussion this afternoon as well. So I'll probably just take these questions one by one. And so the first question I think will be for Sandy. So this has come from kind of someone who says, I'm from a local LGBT charity, and sometimes I feel used as bid candy quite a lot. People really want to be part of our work and impact, but are reluctant to meet the full costs of doing so. So they're keen to get better at communicating our value to lead partners and asserting the need for more funding. Now, Sandy, this was something you talked about kind of quite a lot, and the kind of some of the things that you were saying, kind of having been on both sides almost of this. So having been probably one of several partners, probably in the same situation, perhaps wanting to convince people of the value and to be paid for it, and also being the lead partner, bringing together a whole group of people as part of a program. So I wonder your experience, Sandy, of both sides of this. What advice do you have to organisations in terms of communicating that value, but also ensuring that that work is sufficiently funded as a result?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's probably worth answering it by telling our story. So when we were a very tiny organisation, if I'm honest, I was desperate to be any part of any partnership at any cost, and I sort of sold ourselves out too cheaply, too easily, probably than I should have done. But in some ways, what that did is it was an investment in the future. It got us known. We got a reputation for being good. But then I think I learned over time actually the value of what we did, both the quality of the work, the young people we reached, and I just learned, I suppose, to be more assertive and say this and more confident. And it just takes time. I don't think it's something that you can just snap your fingers and do, but I learned that confidence to say, no, actually, this is what we cost. We've worked it out. We know we can deliver this. We know we reach communities that others don't. So if you want a part of that, this is what it's going to cost. The remarkable thing is that the more assertive, and as long as you're reasonable about it, willing to compromise a little bit and play your part, actually people really respect that. But I remember hearing somebody like myself about 10 years ago saying, you must be assertive. I was going, no, I just desperately need this money to move forward. So I sort of sold myself out. But I would give the same advice as I heard then, which is, do stand up for yourself, believe in what you do, and actually other organisations will respect that and buy into it, and it actually makes for a better, honest partnership, because you're not being honest if you're not saying how much you really cost and what you can achieve.
Thanks so much, Sandy. And I think we'll come. There's a few follow-on questions, probably around that kind of good partnerships. And I'm particularly interested in one of the things you said earlier on around all partners needing to have the ability and the resources to grow and develop. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Rebecca, a question for you. Where do we find some of these good examples of collaboration? And I know that in the report, there are kind of 7 case studies that kind of reflect on kind of the experiences that people have had around collaboration. And I wondered if you might want to just share a little bit about what were some of the good examples that we heard as part of the project.
I'm happy to say a little bit more about that, although I would encourage people to go and read some of the examples in the report, particularly because each one outlines some of the learning from those partners and what they would recommend from other organisations. I think we see a real variety, and obviously the examples in the report really focus on public service delivery. So there are examples of organisations in a kind of lead subcontractor model, and they talk very much about how they try to make, even though that is a kind of hierarchical model, how they try and make that as inclusive as possible, and how they manage to try and do that when they might be subcontracting to quite a large network of smaller organisations. But there are also examples of larger organisations not being in the lead and being kind of subcontracted themselves, and supporting those kind of smaller organisations to take the lead role in their kind of local community. There are also examples of larger charities. They might not be delivering a contract together, but they might have retain some of the money from that contract to invest in a smaller organisation, and that might be to do some kind of service development with them, and make sure that they're reaching marginalised communities.
Thanks, Rebecca. And absolutely, these are there are many examples that we heard. 7 case studies are in the report, so really recommend people looking at those, because they really bring to life many of the frameworks and the findings that we've heard both through the project, and also one of them is also from Sandy, so you can hear more about Sandy's stories and Creative Youth Futures as part of that as well. Sandy, I'm going to come back to you here just to think about these kind of good partnerships, and the slide is still up that has the 5 things that you talked about good partnerships. We talked about quality partnerships earlier and how crucial they were. And this was, of course, one of the things that did come top of our poll of challenges from those listening in. One of the comments here is that kind of having a partner say one thing and then do something different kind of undermines that trust. And I think that's something. I see Rebecca also nodding. I think we heard that through the research as well. Sandy, what's your advice on that? And how do we sustain that trust so that it is kept, as opposed to just saying things to get people on the bid, to get the funding, to win, and then actually that's not really the values that we want to kind of pursue things by. So Sandy, any reflections from you on that?
I think the key is I think one of the things we got right, and I say this knowing that we've got plenty of things wrong too, but we've got plenty. One of the things we've got right in both partnerships is to have a conversation up front about what the expectations were, and before the bid even went in, about what the expectations were, what the targets were, because actually then when things do go wrong, and they do go wrong, you know, we've had partners who sort of haven't delivered, and you know, we've had to go through a sort of remedial process. But if you were clear about it, then actually it helps you to go through that process. And I mean, you know, in some ways I see it very similar to if you've got a member of staff who isn't delivering. It's actually a very similar process. You start by saying, you know, everything right here, what's going on, what can we do, is there any support, help we can give you to do this, or what are the problems, are there any sort of barriers that you're facing or issues? And again, that's where the honesty comes in. Catch it early, but also listen to the partner you're working with. But you also have to be willing to push through if things get difficult and they're not responding. And this is the sort of, in the one case where we have gone back to the contract, we have had to do that and say, look, if you don't deliver this, you've had 2 or 3 warnings, we've tried to help, but you still aren't changing your services, then, you know, fundamentally you won't be part of the partnership anymore, and you won't get the money. And I think, again, I think in the charity sector, we're not often very good at doing the supportive, nice stuff, but not so good sometimes at doing the more the harsher stuff. But actually, if the whole partnership's going to work, everybody's got to play their part in it. So I think just having the guts and to push through when things aren't working is important, and then having a good process that's already laid out, which means that nobody's taken by surprise.
And Danny, what strikes me also, looking at the 5 elements that you pulled out on good partnerships, the top 4 are really important drivers of sustaining that trust. But all of the previous 4, the kind of the vision, the honesty, the generous leadership, the keeping at it, they require that trust as well.
Trust, absolutely. And that's about the personal relationship often, and it's about the personal relationship between the different organisations. And the example of the organisation I used, who'd taken over a community centre or a youth club in the centre of Bristol, they just made some financial mistakes, right? It wasn't, so there's nothing bad happened, they just weren't, it wasn't stacking up in the way that they thought. But the reason it wasn't a problem in the long run is, as soon as they spotted it, they came to us and said, look, Sandy, we're really struggling with this, we're losing money hand over fist in a way that we didn't think we were. So we were able to go, fine, we'll help where we can, we'll help you look for other funding, we'll understand that you can't deliver for the time being. And actually, it was over a period of about 4 or 5 months, they got themselves back on track, got some new funding in, and all was well. If, however, they'd just hidden that, you know, for 5 months, thinking, oh gosh, are we going to be kicked out? That would have created much more of a problem than being open and honest. And that's where the trust comes in. I hope in that case, they obviously had the trust that they would come to us with the problem.
Thanks, Andy. I want to just, there's a couple of questions kind of from some of the other, I guess, actors or kind of stakeholders involved in this. So a couple of questions here around kind of government departments, but also commissioners. So I think, let me pose these 2 questions and then probably go to Rebecca first, and then Sandy do kind of come in as well. So kind of one kind of comment was around, is there an advantage, or how would it be different if government departments collaborated better and broke down some of their silos? Would this be beneficial to helping charities and voluntary organisations working better together? So could we see commission services being more holistic and therefore open to a wider selection of organisations coming together to bid? So one there around breaking down or fostering a better sense of collaboration within government departments. But another one that kind of links here, which is more around commissioners, more specific question. But one person is reflecting they lost a contract, which was a local collaborative partnership with 30 organisations, lost out to a large national organisation. with their saying little effort was made from them to find out what was already happening at the local level. How can we enable the local commissioners, the ones who are scoring those bids, to see the value of that local provision when the scoring is often quite technical and as the bids are being produced by professional bid writers? How do we tackle some of that? So two questions, but focusing on similar themes around the role of government and commissioners in fostering this sense of collaboration as well. Rebecca, can I come to you first, and then Sandy?
Yes, I'm sure Sandy will also have a view on this. So I'll take the commissioners question first. So we did hear a lot through this project of kind of good and bad experiences of working with commissioners at a kind of local government level, but also central government. There is some really difficult practice that makes collaboration very difficult, but we've also heard of some really positive practice of commissioners working really well with the voluntary sector and really supporting partnership approaches. In terms of what commissioners can do differently, I think a higher weighting on quality would be really beneficial, and I think we've seen an increasing focus on price and cost saving, which I think has been really kind of detrimental for communities, but also really bad for the voluntary sector. I think I'd also want to see commissioners really expecting partnership working, but also doing a little bit more to make sure that to address things like bid candy, and to make sure that any organisation in the supply chain can come and talk to them about how that work is progressing. I think there are also some really practical things that commissioners could do in terms of just letting local organisations know that a piece of work might be coming, and so giving them a little bit more time to kind of talk to each other and think about the approach. I think all those things would be really beneficial and better support kind of partnership working. In terms of the departments collaborating point, I'm sure that would be beneficial and really support kind of more holistic ways of working. At a local level, there is a really brilliant example in Plymouth of an alliance supporting people with various different needs across that area, and it brings together the local authority, kind of different commissioners, and a number of local organisations to kind of deliver services holistically for that population, and I think that has been really successful in terms of looking at kind of the experience that those people have of accessing lots of different services. And one of the things that organisations have said throughout this project is that one of the reasons they really want to collaborate is to try and make that experience of accessing services holistic and really kind of streamlined and easy for people.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Sandy.
Yeah. So I think that there's a question there about whether commissioning is the right way to procure services in all circumstances. We seem to be going further and further down the commissioning route, of which I have some issues with, and it is becoming more and more technical, and I'm seeing that sort of those commissioning frameworks, procurement frameworks being used for even smaller and smaller pieces of procurement, which I find odd, if I'm honest. But that's a sort of another question that I think we in NCVO should be pushing against. I think in terms of giving yourselves the best chance of winning a local procurement, and believe me, we've bid for some and haven't got them, and national organisations have come in. I think that there's probably two key things. One is to really try and build that partnership before. You'll probably have if you keep your ear to the ground and talk to local politicians and local council officers, you'll probably get a sense that a commission is coming, or you should know when a particular contract is up for renewal or whatever. So start to build that partnership early, because actually it gives you the chance to have those difficult conversations to build a really good vision. But then also working with the commissioners, because the commissioners have to go through, or should go through, a sort of market testing process. They should be consulting locally around local needs for whatever service users you're working with. And that's the point at which you can start to point out that local provision keeps local money, you know, it responds better to local need, it can bring in more money. And those are all things that if you can persuade your local authority or your commissioners, they can put those things into that commissioning process, and they will score good partnerships. How much extra money can you bring in? You know, what's your knowledge of the local area? And I've seen very different commissions, some which are just clearly a sort of almost bog standard thing, which you could plant in anywhere from sort of Wiltshire to Cumbria to central London. Others which are very clearly commissioned because they want a local provision. And if you can take the time to convince your commissioners that that's the principle that they want to work in, that it sets the playing field for you in a more advantageous way, I guess.
Sandy, thank you. I'm afraid we are 5 minutes to 3, and I'm afraid we're going to have to kind of draw this kind of discussion to a close. But kind of first of all, thank you to all of the people who have sent us questions and comments. We had far more questions as always than we would like to have got through, but it was great to have some direct things that people were sharing and to use this for the discussion here. Just a couple of things just to add to in closing. So for support kind of going forward, we've got lots of all the things that we know at NCVO and with our partners is on our Know How Nonprofit website, and we've got a section on collaboration. So I think that's a great set of resource tools for all aspects of organizational life, but particularly here on collaboration. And you can see we've also kind of got a series of obviously trainings that can kind of help you think about kind of finding the right funding, partnerships, collaboration. Do check out our training platform there as well. We, of course, have the full Rebalancing the Relationship project on our publication site and a series of blogs, as do our partners, NCVO and Lloyds Bank Foundation. So please do see the links that we are sharing here, but also from social media and the blogs of our partners. And we will keep updating kind of what we are hearing and what we're learning through our blogs and through our kind of communications as well. We're also seeing how we use this. So we also want to explore how we will take this report forward. First of all, some of the really practical things that people have shared in today's comments about knowing who are the organisations near them to collaborate with, something that we would love to see us playing a better role within our membership, for example. But also we know that for many charities, they are reliant on local authority kind of grants or contracts or through other commissioning bodies. And we know that some of that is difficult and can be a challenge. We're also thinking about how can we use our influencing work along with our infrastructure partners across the country to kind of really champion some of the big things that we are hearing to kind of make positive changes around some of the ways that these things work. So it just leaves me to say thank you, first of all, to you all for attending today and for listening. If you're listening in not live, thank you for getting to the end of this recorded session. A big thank you to Rebecca for kind of co-authoring the report, and a huge thank you to NCVO and Lloyds Bank Foundation for working very collaboratively with us on this project. And a big thank you to Sandy also for your contributions today, both in terms of the report that you are obviously featured in, but also your kind of really insightful kind of stories and perspectives today's session as well. If you would like to continue this conversation, we would love to keep this kind of conversation going on Twitter. So please do either use NCVO or kind of on the next slide, you'll see Rebecca's Twitter handle as well as obviously NCVO, NCVO and Lloyds Bank Foundation. So thank you very much. We'll also love to hear your feedback and thoughts on today's webinar. So please do kind of get in touch if you have any thoughts about today and how we can improve our webinar series in the future as well. So I think it just leaves me to say thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, everyone.